inspire.
Welcome back to Starting Now. I'm your host, Jeff Sarris. This is the show where I talk to entrepreneurs and freelancers to reveal their unexpected paths to making a living. Today, my guest is Brent Rose. Brent is a freelance journalist, a filmmaker, a storyteller, and the host of a couple of my favorite web series. In this episode, we dive into his journey from actor to journalist and how he's successfully married the two passions in his life, writing and acting, and he's created a persona and a character and style that really stands out. And along the way, we also dive into van life a little bit, which he's been out on the road in a van, living as a journalist, working as a journalist, and just out in the world living and going on these adventures for 5 years now. It's almost 5.5 years. I think this is really going to inspire you to consider how you can take the various aspects of you and make them into something great with your next big idea. So, without further ado, my conversation with Brent Rose. I was going to say, because you were going to back out of not back out, but after 5 years of van life, you were actually going to get an apartment earlier this year, you said, right?
Yeah, I was apartment hunting in beginning of this year and was supposed to move in mid-March. Actually, I'd put down a deposit and everything. And, I was feeling a little bit weird about it in some ways. And part of it is just, it's a big transition, obviously. But there was part of me, I think, that felt like it wasn't quite the right ending for this chapter or whatever in my life. And so in some ways it felt good that it didn't go down quite like that. But in other ways, it was just, total chaos and fear and paranoia and all that stuff with COVID, and then with just everything that was happening with this tumultuous year in our country. So, yeah.
Yeah. So what was the original impetus for going back to the apartment life?
Yeah, I just kind of was feeling like it's time. I just kind of wanted a little bit more space to spread out and stretch. And I've been experimenting with being completely untethered for so long. I mean, it was supposed to be a 1-year experiment. Now it's been, more than half a decade. And I felt like I've gotten so much from it, but I also felt like I was maybe ready to see what putting down roots feels like again, and what happens when I try to incorporate a little bit more stability into my life for the first time in a very long time. So that's kind of the impetus.
Yeah, and when that was originally a 1-year project, was that like essentially for a story that you were going to write, or was it something that you really saw diving into?
Yeah, so I mean, a bit of both. So the original impetus was just because, I'd just gone through, it's very cliche, but I'd just gone through a big breakup, and I was kind of looking to see, I did it in a very stable situation for such a long time, and I kind of wanted to see what the opposite of that felt like, so I could see where on the spectrum between stability and chaos felt like the right balance for me. So that was kind of the original impetus. And then I was like, if I can sell a series of stories on this, then maybe I can get somebody else to pay for some of it. was the original impetus. And I actually did, we almost sold this huge, it was almost gonna be like a sponsored thing, but with us maintaining editorial control, that we were going to do for Gizmodo. And we had this buyer all lined up for it, and they bailed at the last minute, unfortunately. So at that point, I was like, all right, you know what? I'll do it on a shoestring. I'm going to do it my own way. At least that way I won't be beholden to anybody else anyway. And so I still started writing it out for Gizmodo. And then when they were sued out of existence by Hulk Hogan / billionaire Peter Thiel.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was what a fiasco for free press everywhere, really, but especially for my friends at Gawker and Gizmodo. Yeah. So then they lost a lot of their freelance budget, so I was doing less work for them after that, and we had to cut the whole the series, which we'd called Connected States. That was the original name of it. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and that was essentially you were trying to showcase how we're all interconnected. I mean, despite being in different states, right?
Right. Yeah. So that was sort of, there were a bunch of plays on words there. So part of it was about showing the ways we're interconnected and showing that we have more in common than we have different, because this was a year before the 2016 presidential election, a little more, and it was already like clear that the U.S. was extremely divided. Their two main parties were diverging more and more, and I kept thinking, like, there's got to be more commonalities and differences that we're just not hearing about. Wow, my lighting is like kind of crazy dramatic. Sorry about that. I just realized it's like very noir. I should be in black and white. Yeah, so that was kind of one of the original things. And then there was also just the whole, how can you stay connected when you don't have any wires, when you're not plugged into the grid and stuff like that. So it was a challenge from a technological standpoint, as far as making sure I had enough power to run all of my gadgets, making sure I had enough internet connection so I could keep working along the way, and all the various sort of tips and tricks that go into stuff like that.
Yeah, and you mentioned, well, actually, before we dive into the story, the past, and how you got here, how do you describe what you do today? Because you do a lot. I mean, you're a journalist, you're a host of these series, you're an actor. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I am bad at describing what I do, unfortunately, and that's probably something that hurts me career-wise, because it doesn't. I don't know. It looks dumb on a business card to say like all these like slashes, but I mean that is what I do. I do a lot of different things. Like you said, I'm a journalist. I host a lot of videos as well for Wired and Gizmodo and places like that. I do. Yeah, I mean, I haven't acted in a long time, but that's what I went to grad school for, and I still think about it a lot and miss it a lot. It's just I haven't been able to audition for anything in 6+ years, because I haven't been in one place for more than a month or two at a time. I miss creative writing too, screenwriting and all that stuff, and photography is kind of a new thing as well. So I'm all over the place. It's weird, but I have pretty wide interests. So.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I mean, I think that's how you got to where you are today, because of these experiments. So to rewind a little bit, I mean, over a decade ago, you were sort of knee deep in acting. You were writing a little bit for PC World, if I understand correctly, and you were doing a bunch of different experiments. You had the Leaf Garrison project. You had 50 and 50.
Wow. Oh man, you did your homework. Holy shit.
Oh yeah. I wanted to be sure
Right.
to sort of look at your journey and
Nicely
see where
done.
you come
Those
from.
are some deep cuts. All right, cool. Yeah.
But in the 50 and 50 project, you would talk a little more about sort of the trials and tribulations you were facing at that time, because you did have to pay the bills. You were using the project, I think, to sort of build your reel, get people sort of to know who you are. But what did you envision at that time, and what were some of the stumbling blocks that you faced back then? Yeah,
50 and 50. Man, I have such bittersweet memories of that project. So yeah, exactly like you say, I was trying to build my reel, and I was trying to establish more character work and stuff like that. I think at the time my dream was to be on SNL as a cast member, and I was writing a lot of sketch comedy, and I was doing a lot of improv at the time, and I kind of intended it as a flex, sort of be like, look, I could come up with a totally different character and write a short film and make a short film for a character every week. So that was the idea. And at the time, I was living in New York, and I was auditioning, stuff like that. And for work, I was just temping, just temping at these like horrible, horrible office jobs. A lot of banks and law firms and stuff like that. It was really soul sucking, but I was like, whatever, I can do both. But it turned out that doing both was really hard, because I have trouble just kind of like doing like a quick little here, let me just throw together a video and put it out there, I end up getting very OCD when it comes to my editing process, especially the writing and other stuff as well. But I would really go wild on the edits and, obsess over one or two little frames out of cuts and stuff like that. Which I think ultimately, it was a really good experience for me because it really taught me how to edit. I was really kind of learning on the fly. And it taught me a lot about storytelling. But the problem was I was spending, easily 30 hours a week on it, in addition to, the 40 hours a week I was working at whatever shit job I was working. And, plus like whenever I could audition, I was auditioning for stuff. And it really became overwhelming. So eventually I was like taking on less work because I felt like I had to finish this project. And I was just kind of like running on reserves. And finally I kind of got to this point where I basically just ran out of money. Like I ran out of like savings and even wiggle room in my credit cards. And I was like, okay, I gotta put this on hold until I can, fix my finances. And then I just, went to work and stuff like that. And that's kind of around when I stumbled into journalism completely accidentally. It just started as a very part-time thing. That was like, oh, well, this is, a nice supplement to temping. And then I realized I'm like, oh, maybe I could do this instead of temping. And then before I knew it, it just snowballed and became a full-time gig for Gizmodo at the time initially. And I was like, all right, well, I'll do this for like a year and then I'll just go freelance and I can, get back to acting. And I did it for about a year and a half and then did go freelance, but never going freelance initially. Like you're just hustling so much, especially when you're new and you're trying to establish your name. So getting back to it was extremely challenging. Mm-hmm. And then this road trip and yeah, so it's been a while. I miss it a lot.
Yeah. So when you were first getting into journalism then, since that was new for you, what did you have inspirations that you pulled? Like, were there journalists that you saw and you were like, oh, this is sort of like me? Or I'm always curious to see, because you have a very distinct style that in terms of being the host, I feel like you have that sort of journalist, adventurer, it might be gonzo journalism. Like it's like you are the focus of it. And I don't know if that's negative. Sorry, I don't know exactly like the terminology on stuff when it comes to that.
Right.
But yeah, you have a specific style. So just curious where your inspirations pulled from when you were first starting out.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of layers there. So, part of it was because I was coming from a background of acting and improv. I very much felt like I was faking my way through it, especially at the beginning. And really, even to this day, to some extent. And I think that's how we kind of are with any new job. Like we're always like, all right, I'm just going to you kind of learn on the fly. And that's really what I was doing there. So there's some of that. And I think part of where my style comes from, well, part of it was, I was reading a lot of Gizmodo before I was hired by Gizmodo. And they, especially in those days, had a very snarky kind of tone. And I say that with love. I mean like good snark in a way, because there was so much, who was it who wrote this article? There was this great piece, I think it was Gawker did it, on snark versus smarm and how like snark is needed to like as an antidote to all this like saccharine, disgusting smarm. And I actually thought that was a pretty great piece. So Gizmodo was, in my opinion, would kind of take the air out of a lot of things that took themselves very seriously. And so that kind of fostered a real irreverent style, I think, in some ways. And then I also had an editor there named Joe Brown, who then went on to work at Wired again, and then he was the editor-in-chief of Popular Science for a few years, and now is at, where is he at? Road and Track, Car and Driver, something like that. He's like overseeing like all of the auto magazines now. He's a really, really creative guy. But his whole ethos was that people should write. He wanted his writers to try to find things that they're most interested in. It's like, if you want to be outside all the time, which I did, then like write about outdoor gear. If you want to be like, testing like, keep finding ways to get outside of the office, then like start testing these action cameras and stuff like that. And that was, and his motivation for that was like, you will care more and your work will be better if it's something that actually interests you and not something you're just, faking your way through. So that was a big motivating factor for me. And then as far as hosting stuff, I think it's kind of a combination of all of that, because it's, a lot of it is improv, especially when I'm, talking to people and interviewing people and just kind of seeing what happens when these gadgets break on me or break me. And then, when it comes to, writing the setups and stuff like that, that goes back to like the sketch comedy kind of background, trying to like slip little jokes in there. And then there's I still have that sort of irreverent tone, I think, from those early Gizmodo days, where I don't take this stuff too seriously. I mean, some things I do, certainly, but a lot of stuff, like, it's just a smartphone, man. Like, do we care that much? Is it that important? We're not changing the world here. And I think a lot of tech journalism is just like, they speak in hushed tones about, Steve Jobs and everything's so sacrosanct. And I think that whole world is ripe for skewering. So yeah, I guess that's sort of where my style comes from. Also, I don't take myself terribly seriously in many respects. So I think that that kind of helps too.
Well, yeah, and the humor and everything really comes through, because I first found you with the magic video. So the magic service where you were texting and they would do things, and it was just so entertaining. And
yeah,
from that
was
point,
the first video I did for Wired, actually.
Oh, was it the first one?
That was the beta test. We're like, all right, let's do that. I mean, we had like 2 days. I don't even think we had 2 days. I think we had like a day notice. Like, we want you to check out the service. We'll give you whatever it was, $500 in petty cash. And I was working with this videographer guy who was a friend of our friend. And yeah, we're like, all right, let's just see what we can come up with. And he and I ended up creating a lot of those videos together. We just worked really well and bounced off ideas off each other in a really fun way. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Nice. Oh, no, it's all good. So did that just sort of naturally happen then? Did you have to convince anyone that, hey, I can host this? Because before that, you would do tech reviews and things, but you weren't really hosting a show. You were showing products.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. So so that is kind of funny, because so when I was at Gizmodo, for whatever reason, I never understood this, the aesthetic was they didn't really want us on camera at the time, really anybody. It was very, they really shied away from personality driven stuff, which I think was kind of a shame, because like the personalities is why people was reading Gizmodo in the first place. But whatever, I think it was overall company top down aesthetic. Like none of the Gawker video sites had any of that kind of stuff. Now they've been trying to catch up for a long time now. But anyway, so yeah, I did not do any of the hosting stuff because it was actively discouraged for a long time. And the way the Wired series came about was I was out to dinner with some friends, and some friends of friends were there too. And I was talking to this guy named Peter Furia, who was sitting next to me or across from me or something like that. And I was like, oh, what do you do? And he's like, oh, I make videos for Wired. And I was like, oh, it's funny, I write for Wired sometimes. He's like, oh, really? Well, yeah, we're looking for new hosts all the time. And I was like, well, I have a MFA in acting and a lot of improv experience. And he's like, what? Oh, let's have coffee tomorrow. And he basically, like, the way he phrased it, it made it sound like he had an idea for a show that he wanted me to host. And I was like, okay, great. And so then I showed up at this coffee meeting, and he's like, so what would you want your show to be? And I was like, oh shit. I had not thought that through at all. And so we kind of sat there and just batted some ideas around, and we were like, all right, maybe we'll do a pilot episode on some wearables or something like that. And then a couple days later is when somebody reached out. They said, hey, there's this new magic service. We want somebody to test it. How about we do this one first? And that was just it. We were just kind of off to the races. And that was such a fun video to make. And ever since then, that's kind of, we still sort of look at that as a template when we're going back to making these things, because it captured a lot of the things that we really like. And not all of our videos have been successful, I think, creatively.
Mhm.
Even ones that have gotten a lot of views, I think some of them are just kind of like, they're okay. And others, I think, stand out when you capture that curiosity and the fun and the play. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really what it is we're seeing everything through your lens of like what you're experiencing. But then that was the only reason I was thinking Gonzo, but I don't know
Mm-hmm.
again, like sort of where, like how does Gonzo actually play into journalism and how do people view it, just from my understanding?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super up on the
Okay.
semantics of Gonzo, but I mean, I do think that a lot of what I do could be classified as Gonzo. Certainly with the whole this whole endless road trip thing that I've been on for forever. A lot of it has just been throwing myself into the situation, and it's kind of like embedding yourself in the middle of whatever it is that's going on that you're going to write about, and then reporting it from the inside. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the most objective form of journalism. Um, in many ways, to me, it feels much more personal, and I think that has its place just as much as looking in from the outside is also really important, and that objective thing is obviously super important. But this would probably fall more into the whole investigative and opinion column or editorial than strictly objective.
Mm-hmm.
But I like it.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I just love everything that you do because it's so entertaining. I think you're actually, I don't even know that I've come across other hosts of like regular series like this, because it tends to be maybe celebrities coming in reading like autocompletes and stuff. Like I don't know if it's just like self-selected for what I do or for what I look at, but yeah, I haven't come across many other people doing what you do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in some ways, it was sort of a new template certainly for Wired Video at the time, and it kind of took the video channel there in many ways in a more I don't know if human centric is quite the right thing. I think the phrase they've used is personality driven.
Mm-hmm.
Shows, and so we saw like a couple more of those come out as well. Robbie Gonzalez did this great series called Almost Impossible for Wired that I thought captured it really, really well. And then yeah, more recently it's kind of gone back to more of those sort of autocomplete things and stuff like that, which are it's a easy formula to do, and I'm not knocking it. I'm sure it
Yeah.
does a good job, and they're entertaining, especially when you get like entertaining people on it. But my hope, and in my conversations with Wired, is that they seem to be eager to get back to some more personality driven stuff too. So we shall see how that all plays out. We've talked about potentially doing some more projects in the new year, but of course we're all waiting to see what happens with COVID-19 and stuff like that. So
Yeah, for sure.
TBD.
Yeah, and so you've done both freelance and, I mean, it was briefly with Gizmodo, but actual staff writer.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the pros and cons of the two different paths?
Yeah, so pros for being a staff writer would be, well, health insurance is a big pro, and those sorts of benefits. I mean, that's nothing to sneeze at, certainly. And it's crazy that we live in a country where you are dependent on your work for health insurance, or you have to pay out of pocket for your own health insurance, which is what I've been doing for a long time. But a little soapbox aside, so that's a thing. I also think in some ways, depending on who you're working for and depending who your editor is, there can be more freedom to kind of go deep down the rabbit hole and do a longer investigative piece, because you've got, your income is coming in anyway. So even if you're not, putting something out every day, then, if you're on salary, then they've approved some longer duration story, then that can be a real benefit for you. The cons would be, less freedom. Certainly, well, I don't know. Right now, nobody's in an office, but at the time, like, you used to have to go into the office pretty much, pretty regularly. I don't know. I think it's a little bit easier to get. You find a role and you get pigeonholed a little bit, which can certainly happen during freelance as well. Like I'm always trying to get out of my own little pigeonholes, which is a weird phrase now that I think about it. But yeah, and then with freelance, like there is so much freedom to like go and work from wherever and work for whomever. But the cons, of course, are that some outlets are slow to pay, and they've gotten better about that in general. But I mean, when I first started out, you're waiting for paper checks a lot of the time. I mean, some outlets actually still pay in paper checks through the mail, which is just insane to me.
And being in a van, that's extra difficult.
Correct. Yes, for sure. Yeah, I've set up like post office boxes and stuff like that, but it's hard for especially when you don't know when it's coming and you don't know where you're going to be. So I'll typically send it to somewhere, to a family member in California or something like that, and they'll just hold on to them for me. And then it's like, all right, well, hopefully I can get there sometime soon and cash those checks. So there's that. There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot more pitching involved. So you have to. I mean, and I honestly think the art of the pitch is one of those things that is one of the most important skills for a freelancer to have, and I think it's one of the ones that that a lot of them are lacking, and I think it's what separates a lot from those who are working from those who aren't. Yeah, writing a good pitch, it takes time, and you don't get paid to pitch. Sometimes it's almost as long as the story itself, if not longer. I've written pitches that were easily longer than the story themselves. Wow. And whether they don't get bought, if they don't get bought, then that's just a bunch of work that you did for nothing.
Mm-hmm. And what phase in the process is that? Is that you have a concept for a story? Is it you've already sort of experienced it? Where does that fit in when you start pitching?
So it depends on what it is. Like, say it's say there's some event that I've heard about that sounds cool. Like there's one example is like there was going to be this first pro surf contest at Kelly Slater's mechanical wave pool. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that's going to be a rad story. I want to get there. I had an invite because somebody found me through, I don't know what. And they're like, yeah, so here's this thing. If you can find an outlet, we'd love you to come check it out and stuff like that. And it's like, okay, well, now I have to find an outlet. And so for that one, I ended up doing for Deadspin before Deadspin was its new zombie form. Now it would be all the guys moved over to Defector, which is a good name. And those are all great writers there. But yeah, so then I would, say like, okay, well, there's a tech angle here, so maybe I can sell it to Wired. So then you start like writing out this whole pitch with all of like the techie things that happen, and they're like, yeah, we've already got somebody working on that. You're like, okay, well, there's a sports angle, so then maybe I'll try Outside Magazine. So then you write them and like, yeah, this is the thing. Like, yeah, it's cool, but like, these mechanical things aren't really for us, and like, okay, I get it, it's not nature enough. So then I went to Deadspin. It's like, hey, listen, the concept is more like, how is a mechanical wave going to change pro surf contests, where the whole thing behind pro surf contests is the wave is different every single time, right? The ocean is never the same. It's like, snowflakes or fingerprints. So then how does that work when suddenly the wave is the exact same every time? And they're like, oh yeah, that's interesting. Okay, yeah, you can write that for us. And then you go back and forth on, how much and how long the article is going to be and all that stuff. And then slowly make that happen. So that's kind of the pitching process. And there have been stories that I thought were absolutely great, but would have to be long stories just because of the nature of the thing we're diving into. And people were like, yeah, it's cool, but we just don't have the budget right now, or it's just not quite right for us. And some of those stories are just sitting out there gathering dust, if only in my brain. Some of them have been written and are gathering dust, but that's how it goes.
Yeah. Is it at all?
So there's that sort of.
is it at all feasible for you to be independently publishing these? And like, because obviously, I mean, you have maybe say YouTube revenues from ads and things that can be minimal depending on the numbers. Is there any other channel for a journalist to go more independent on stories that maybe you love, but you just don't have the outlet for it?
That's a really good question, and I don't totally know the answer for it. Wow, this lighting is getting more and more dramatic as we go.
Yeah, a
it's
little
ridiculous looking.
A little contrasty, but
sorry about that.
it's all good.
Oh, well, whatever. Sorry, what were we just talking about? Distracted by noir.
Yeah, if there are other outlets where you would be able to go independently.
Right. Yeah. So that's a tricky one, and I've thought about that before, and I have sometimes just written stories for my own blog and stuff like that, which is satisfying, and I like putting those stories out there. But I haven't spent that much time marketing my own blog, and I don't have any kind of advertising on my blogs or anything like that, so that would generate zero revenue. And the freedom is really nice, but at the same time, it's hard to sit down and write so much and do so much work for free, unless it's for a really good cause, which is a separate thing. But so that's tricky. And the same with videos and stuff like that. I sometimes will just put stuff on my own YouTube channel, but and I've thought about maybe I should just create my own show for my YouTube channel, but I feel like I was starting from not totally starting from scratch, but kind of sort of starting from scratch in terms of viewership compared to like what a network like Wired's YouTube channel is now working with. Mm-hmm. And there's also a bit of like, oh man, like, Wired didn't have that many viewers when I started making videos for them too. So part of me is like, oh man, I kind of, who knows what could have happened if I'd made those videos on my own channel and then like blown my own stuff up, then, maybe it'd be a different story. But that's one of those what if kind of things. You never know. So you could either, you could be making a ton of videos and make no money off of them ever, or maybe it'll be a slow burn and eventually you start seeing a profit. But it's so much more hustling and marketing then that is just not part of the process that really interests me. It's part of the business end of it, and it's important. And I don't like it personally. Yeah. Not that it's bad. I just don't find it fulfilling. So I would rather not do it. So for me, it's kind of worth it for somebody else to pay me to make the videos, and they just, they get all the profits and revenue from it. But yeah, it's a double-edged sword for sure. All right, I'm going to try rotating here because this is distracting me.
It's all good. Okay, new scene. Okay.
Sure. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, and I like how you took you didn't make the videos for yourself, but you saw the opportunity to actually build a personal brand. I know it's not the focus and things, but I really like in somewhat pivoting over to van life, I feel like you were able to create this platform where you have good engagement, like on social media, on the different things that you do, like people are following your story. And I think that's a really great approach that a lot of people might miss out on.
Yeah. It's weird. I have such a love-hate relationship with that kind of stuff. With social media in general. I recognize it's important in a lot of ways, and I recognize that it's benefited me in a lot of ways. But and sometimes, it's also such a time suck. And, both from just like the reading and the consuming and the endless, thumb scrolling, and also from, thinking about how to put things out and how to talk about it. What do I write about this photo that I took? And, I don't know, in many ways it feels like a distraction. And I've been less involved in social media recently. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Oh yeah.
I haven't cracked that code.
Yeah, for sure. And you're not necessarily leveraging it for anything in particular. Like you're building your community and people recognize you more, which might help with potentially with pitching, but more than likely, I mean, they see your body of work, which is immense, and it's through these other channels.
Yeah, and that is a thing. When I'm, I've pitched several TV shows over the last couple of years and stuff like that, and that's one of the things they look at when they're like, all right, well, who's this guy who would be hosting it or who's producing it or whatever, and they want to look at your social media and see how many followers you have and see what your engagement's like and stuff like that. And so it's become a real important tool for selling stuff. Much to my chagrin in some ways, but I kind of feel like things should stand on their own merit or not. But I understand that everybody's looking at the bottom line too.
Yeah. So to jump forward to van life just a little bit, how was that? What was the transition for you as a journalist living in a van on the road? What types of things did you have to deal with? Like you mentioned like Wi-Fi connections and things like that, but were there any other things that came up from a career and business perspective?
Yeah. There were a few modifications. So one of the big things was it was just hard to stay focused on like sitting down and writing, especially if it was a story I wasn't that excited about. Like if I'm just reviewing a phone or a watch or something like that, when I know right outside my door is like some whole adventure that I could be having. And especially when the van thing was new and so exciting, like all I wanted to do was go out and explore. Which definitely led to me simply not picking up as much work as I should have, and I wasn't pitching as much, and I wasn't hustling as much. And then I was like, oh shit, I had to overcorrect and like have to, it took me years to find the balance, honestly, between not doing enough work and doing too much work. So that was one big adjustment. It also, I would say, it did open up more opportunities for me in a lot of ways because van life. #van life was becoming this much more popular movement. And it steadily has become more and more popular over the last 5 years. And just the last year alone, it's like exploded because so many people are, vans are just about the only safe way to travel right now, or RVs or whatever. Mm-hmm. So in that way, it opened up a lot of doors because I was, I could write about van life and the things I do and the places you go and tips and tricks and all that stuff. So that opened up some stuff. And then just being able to go to places and see things that I might not otherwise be able to go to or see, then I could tell stories based on those as well. So that was, those were the positive side for sure.
Yeah, and having that adventure, being out doing something all the time, I think probably really plays into just to the inspiration, to the opportunity for stories and like seeing what's out there. One of the things you talked about was being in yes shape, which I really liked. I love the thought of that. What does yes shape mean, and how do you maintain that in a van?
Yeah, so I do hope to eventually do a video or an article about this, but yeah, the basic, I mean, yes shape is essentially like if somebody's like, hey, let's go climb this mountain tomorrow, you can be like, okay, because you're in shape enough to do it. Or somebody's like, hey, you want to go surfing? You're like, yeah, sure, let's go. Or let's go snowboarding or whatever. It's not like, I'll be like gassed after half an hour and then you have to like just go sit at the bar. Not that there's anything wrong with sitting at the bar. So yeah, that's kind of the thing. And it's also, just personally for me, like I've had a lot of injuries over the last many years, but especially the last few years. I dislocated my right elbow and my left shoulder in two totally different instances, and strained my MCL and one of my knees and like all kinds of stuff. So staying in shape is kind of the only way that my body stays together at this point, because I managed to avoid having surgery, but it was through doing a ton of physical therapy and just trying to keep the right things strong. So that's a big part of it as well, is just maintaining functionality. And then as far as like what I would do for it, I had to, after, the first chunk of time in the van, I realized I was like getting kind of soft and gaining some weight and stuff like that, because I'm a big food person, and I mean, my mom was an anthropologist, and I think that food is such a huge, important part of culture. So when I'm driving around and exploring all these places I've never been, like I want to eat my way through these different towns and cultures and stuff like that. So especially when I was going through the South, like from Santa Fe, which is like the Southwestern food, and then into Texas, and then like further into the South, like New Orleans, which is just one of the all-time amazing, incredible food towns. I was suddenly like, oh, I'm eating like all this heavy stuff all the time because I want to taste everything, but this is not sustainable. So I basically created what I called a rest stop workout, which was like just these short little workouts I could do in the grass anywhere, like at a little park or a rest stop or something like that. And that would be enough to at least, maintain strength. And then I would start, all right, if I'm going to go hard at lunch, then I'm going to, go a little bit lighter at breakfast or at dinner or vice versa. And try to, run and stuff like that when I could, but, or surf. If I can surf, then that's my workout. And I'm so happy about it. And snowboarding is kind of like that too. But yeah, it's basically just doing anything you can to stay active and keep things moving and to stay strong. Especially in the van, you're often parked at weird angles and stuff like that. You don't realize, but if your van is off, then you're kind of like, you have to kind of correct with your lower back so that when you're typing, and yeah, anyway, so just maintaining core muscles is like a big part of avoiding pain for me.
Yeah, makes sense. I love the approach. Just yes shape is the perfect encapsulation of it. So if you were to start over today, you know everything you know, the experience is all valid, but you don't have, say, your network, you don't have the body of work yet. What might be your first steps to sort of getting back to like where you are now?
So, I mean, I guess which career are we talking about here? Like for journalism?
Yeah, I mean,
or,
just I guess in anything, whatever you would be pursuing most. If it's the journalism, if it's hosting, if it's maybe something completely different, what would be your first steps?
Yeah, that is a really good question. I guess, yeah, for those starting out, I think finding a way to create a body of work and just to start writing and find your voice is such an important thing, because you see a lot of copy out there that just reads like it was written by an AI or something like that. It's like, it's got a lot of facts there, but it doesn't have it doesn't have a unique flavor to it. And other writers are great about this. So I think writing enough, even if it's just for your own blog or whatever, so you kind of establish what lights your fires and what gets you interested enough to spark that creativity, is incredibly important. Because there are a million things that you could write about, but if you're not finding the thing that really interests you, then it's going to be kind of bland, even if it's maybe financially a doable thing. So that would be a huge thing. And I think from there, there are a lot of small publishers who are looking for freelance writers and looking for stories. And I think it's, if you're looking to break into someplace, really read the hell out of the outlet you're wanting to pitch. And I think that's like a huge mistake a lot of people make, is they pitch outlets stories that have nothing to do with that have nothing to do with what these outlets cover, or just like the completely wrong style or the wrong take for them. So I think that's incredibly important, is doing your research and really knowing the voice of the outlet as well. So I mean, while you always have your own voice in some ways, my style is radically different if I'm writing from The Verge or writing for Wired or writing for Gizmodo. And those are all three, big tech outlets, but each one of them has a very unique voice and a very unique focus and style. And I think it's important that if you want to keep working with those, if you want to get in the door with them and then want to keep working with them, it's really important to understand how your voice fits in with their style. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a difficult balance too, because you need to establish your voice, but to fit within
100%.
the confines, because I mean that's why you stand out, because of your voice and who you are. And yeah, really why I wanted to talk to you. So yeah.
Thanks. Yeah. And I mean, and there have been places that were a bad fit,
Mhm.
where I wrote a piece or two and it was just very clear. It's like, this is not the right, we just weren't in alignment. And I could either like churn out some like kind of monotone copy for them if that's what they wanted or whatever it was, or maybe I wasn't edgy enough for them. But it felt like there was something that felt icky about it, and it's like, it's not worth the money. There are other outlets out there. I'd rather find one that likes the way I write, and that where I enjoy their style too. And it's I just think it's a much better way to build a relationship. So like that's why Gizmodo was kind of the first place I landed, was because like I thought these guys were hilarious. I thought they were really smart and really funny, and they had that kind of attitude that I thought was missing. And that was like, it's like, oh yeah, I want to be a part of that. That actually looks really fun.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, like I'd love to see more of what you're doing, like this style, the humor, the everything you inject in there. I mean, even just how you start them out with something like, I'm Brent Rose, tech journalist and mammal, or whatever you throw in. It's just all those little things just make it really engaging, hook you in. I feel like you've merged the like entertainer, YouTube creator, all of this with proper journalism in a way that isn't done all that much. And yeah, I really appreciate it. So
thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, that's my goal. So I appreciate that comes through, and that yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it
Thanks for that.
does.
Yeah, there aren't, and some of it is finding your niche. Like I knew that there are not a lot of journalists out there who like have done work for some serious outlets, but who have also gone through improv training and have gone through like 3 years of an MFA program for acting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, all right, well, here are these, like, here's the Venn diagram, right? They're gazillion actors and they're gazillion journalists, but then you like cross this little tiny sliver and you're like, oh, okay, there's my niche. So I think that's a really important thing in finding your skills. And that could be anything. Like if you're a big kayaker or something like that, and a journalist or whatever, you're like, okay, well, there are a lot of kayakers and there are a lot of journalists, but who can write really engagingly about kayaking or whatever. So, that can apply to anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for doing this. Where should we send people to check out your work and what you're up to?
Yeah, brentrose.com is the website that I have that I rarely update, but it does exist, and any major changes will probably go there. My Instagram is Brent Danger Rose, which I kind of picked on a whim just because Brent Rose is already taken, and my Twitter is just at Brent Rose because I got him there. I was first on that one. The other Brent Rose, I think he's like a saxophone player in Louisiana or something like that. I've never met the guy, but we're always battling each other for who gets just the straight up at Brent Rose type things.
Nice. Well, yeah. So thanks again for doing this, and appreciate you taking your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it.
I want to thank Brent for joining me on this episode. Be sure to check out everything he's up to at brentrose.com and follow him on all the socials. As always, this episode of Started Now is brought to you by Built. At Built, we help you get started online. Whether you want to start a blog or a business, head on over to built.co. That's bylt.co to get started. Built, your website, built for you, simply. Finally, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, be sure to check out the video version on YouTube. And that'll do it for this week. Again, I'm Jeff Sarris. This has been Started Now, and I will see you next time.